Welcome to the Athletic Football Show. I'm Robert Mays. Great show for you guys today. And what has become an annual tradition a couple days out from the draft, we're going to chat about the biggest questions that we have now that we're about 48 hours away from the kickoff of the 2024 NFL Draft. Here to help me do that, two of the best draft analysts around. First of all, it's my good friend, Nate Tice. Nate, how you doing, buddy?
I'm doing very well. It feels weird to be wearing a Timberwolves sweatshirt and talking about, draft success and good things in the draft. But actually, Anthony Edwards works and Carl Anthony Towns. So never mind. But those are no.
And wearing a Timberwolves sweatshirt for a relevant game late into April. That's got to feel pretty good.
In April. Yeah, it's 80-something degrees here in Vegas, but I'm still wearing the sweatshirt because it's the best piece of Wolves gear I have. Everything else has shrunk over the years because I haven't needed to buy anything else. Yeah, everyone wants to talk about NBA playoffs before the draft, right? That's what we're here for. So let's get to the other guy, please.
Also joining us today, it is our draft expert at The Athletic. It's Dane Brugler. Dane, how you doing, buddy?
I had no idea the NBA playoffs were going on right now. That's interesting. Now, I've been kind of MIA the last 3-4 days. Strep throat just zaps you of all your energy and just it's the worst. And it doesn't help that I'm just the world's worst pill taker. So I think my wife has gotten a sneak preview of 40 years from now when she has to cut up my pills in these little fourths and, put them. She packed for my trip to Detroit one of those week-long containers. So they're already cut up for me and I know when to take them and all that. But this is all too much information. It's draft week. I'm in the holiday spirit of sharing. So it's good to be here.
Every year your body just shuts down when we get to this point in the calendar.
I almost made it this year. Almost.
Except you didn't. You have like a real illness. You're not just tired. You don't just have a cough. You have strep throat. We appreciate you powering through.
Yes.
What really matters is that you're going to be ready and raring to go by Thursday, because that is the day where everything goes down. We are doing a live draft show Thursday and Friday from Detroit. Me, Dane, Nate, Diana, fun guests over those 2 days. We're going to have some of our beat writers on. We're going to have some people from The Athletic on, just chatting about some of the more interesting picks that are going to happen. So please come check that out with us on Thursday night. We're going to be kicking off at, don't quote me on this, Beller, but 7:30 Eastern, I believe is the plan. 7:30 Eastern time on YouTube. We're going to be getting going about a half hour before the actual draft kicks off. So make sure you are in your seat at 7:30 to come join us, because it is going to be one hell of a night. We are very much looking forward to it. Today, though, we're going to do what we've done the last couple years and just really kick around some of the biggest questions we have, biggest unanswered questions heading into the draft. I mean, there's still a lot of mystery around this year specifically. It just feels like there's so many different iterations and possibilities on the table in the top 5 and the top 10. And let's start with that, because the biggest question I have heading into Thursday is someone going to come up to 3, 4, or 5 for one of these quarterbacks, and which team is going to do the trading up and which team is going to do the trading down? So Dane, as you sit here 2 days out and you think about how the quarterbacks are going to go and where they're going to go in the top 5, what are the possible scenarios that are of the most interest to you?
So this feels like either the Denver fan base or the Minnesota fan base. One of those is going to be heartbroken. Maybe both. But it feels definitely one of them is going to be heartbroken because they weren't able to get the trade done to go up and get one of these quarterbacks. Okay, let's play it out. Caleb's going 1, obviously. Let's just say Commanders at 2 take Jaden Daniels. Yeah. Let's say that's how it plays out, and then 3,
which most people think is going to be the case. By the way, if you polled 100 people right now, that's what most people think is going to happen.
And that's in the league and those of us on the outside. So that's how a lot of people around in the league believe will happen at number 2. At number 3 with the Patriots, that's where things get really interesting. Is it as simple as, okay, well, if they take Jaden, we take our top quarterback 3, if that's McCarthy or if that's May. And that's the key thing is, if Jaden goes 2, it's no guarantee that May is just the next pick. It could very well be J.J. McCarthy. And then that sets off a new set of dominoes, because then I feel like that number 4 pick, which is currently Arizona, if May is still available, I feel like there might be more bidders in that situation for that spot. And so that's something we've talked about the scenario playing out. I did it in my 7-round mock draft about the Cardinals trading out, trading right back in, just like they did last year. I think for the Cardinals to do that, Monty Ossenfort, he'd almost have to have that secondary offer almost verbally agreed upon, because you don't want to trade out of this top 10 only to get shut out of trading back in. So it's like we've been saying this whole process. Some years it's not really great to have a top 10 pick. This year, it just happens to be a great year. And you have a team like the Bears that have multiple picks in the top 10. So it's a great year to have that pick. So that's the conundrum. If you're Arizona, it's going to be hard to potentially pass up one of these offers from Denver, from Minnesota. But it's going to be interesting based off of which quarterbacks go 3 and which go 4. Starting with 3 with the Patriots, what is their asking price? I think they want to stick and pick, because again, this is, if you're picking a quarterback in the top 5, top 10, it's an ownership pick. Absolutely believe the Crafts want to go with the quarterback, but is there a certain point where the offer gets so high that it's like, listen, can Elliott Wolf sell it that, hey, we can't pass on this, so we have to trade out of this spot? I'm just not sure how much of that offer, what is that offer? That's hard to guess at this point.
Nate, I think that the biggest wrench in this to me is how far do the Patriots or Cardinals want to go down? Like Dane alluded to, do they want to go down out of the top 10? For the Cardinals, I think it's coming away from this with an elite receiver. If it really is true that they don't see a huge gap between Neighbors and Harrison, they can move a little bit, but they can't move that much. And if the Patriots or Dunes, one of these guys, right? Like they want to come away from with one of those receivers, you'd be a little scary to come out outside of the top 10. If you're New England and you want to come away from this process with a quarterback, but you're willing to move around a little bit, you can't go outside of the top 10. So then the team that to me is the biggest wrench in all of this, because it feels like there's enough aligning. There's the need for a quarterback. There is a top 10 pick where these other teams wouldn't have to go down very far, is the Giants, right? If this falls a certain way, is that actually the most likely quarterback trade scenario, because it aligns with what those teams at 3 and 4 also want to get out of this process?
Right. And most drafts don't have quarterbacks, and most drafts don't have really nice consolation prizes and really nice, perhaps what was called a generational receiver. And I think a lot of us consider a very good receiver just one of them, but much less might be 2 more. It might be 1, 2, or even 3 offensive linemen that teams view as top 10, 12 guys. So you have true building blocks at different positions. So that sets off dominoes too. What if we see that trade up and then it's not for the quarterback, it's for the receiver? Something like that, remember, like last year, the trade up happened. And it was like, oh, here it comes. And then it comes, it's the Texans again. We're like, oh, Will Anderson was the trade up guy. Like that, you never know with those, because there's these types of prizes. But
that's a great example, because getting back to that, the Vikings wanted that pick, right? The Vikings wanted to come up for Anthony Richardson, but who was picking? The Cardinals were, right?
Yeah, Cardinals were
the Cardinals pick. The Cardinals weren't willing to go into the 20s. So sometimes it's not about what the best offer is. Sometimes it's about how far you're willing to slide down the board. And there's a very good chance we're going to see a very similar scenario or a very similar set of considerations play into the decisions on Thursday.
Yeah, the shell game, it's like becoming an annual tradition. Like I feel like there's going to be a little shell game happening here with these guys, because there's so these players. But we're talking about the Patriots, and even with like the McCarthy thing, or like being maybe perhaps their guy, how easy of a sell to the owners is, hey, let's get another Michigan guy in here, like at quarterback. But just again, when you get owners, that's such a huge variable into this that it changes how the math is. What influence is needed to move up and down. But like also saying like, hey, we're going to move up, but it's going to be for a receiver, and the owners go, nah. We're not going to pay that money type of that. And then that changes all the math for that. So that's just another component of this, just depending on the position for everything. So it's just, I think that Giants kind of theory is interesting, because they stay in that striking range, because maybe they go from 3 to 6 and then the 4th quarterback, because the Cardinals stand pat at 4 because they want to take Marvin Harrison Jr., because no one really wants the 4th quarterback, or the 5th pick, and Chargers like, oh, we'll just take a lineman, and they get the best of both worlds. And that quarterback is there at 6. I don't think that's going to happen, but you just never know how these pieces are going to fall.
Dane, looking at the teams at 4 and 5, right? Because those are kind of the strike range spots from teams outside of the top 10 where they might be looking to get. Which team do you think is more willing to trade out of the top 10 based on where they are in their process? Do you think it's Arizona, or do you think it's the Chargers?
I think for Arizona, it just comes down to how confident they feel about trading right back up. Because I think you could probably, if you're Monty, you're talking to 5 the Chargers. You're talking to, I don't think the Giants are trading back. You're talking to 7 with the Titans. You're talking 8 with the Falcons. So I think 3 realistic spots that you could potentially move up and still feel like you get one of those top 3 receivers. So I think if you're the Arizona, I think you're, for the price that one of those, whether it's Denver or Minnesota, would be willing to pay, I think it's worth it. I mean, they have a ton of picks. So it's not like Arizona needs picks. They have a ton of them. But it depends if the price is right, which we think it very well could be, because Minnesota and Denver both feel like they're desperate to move up there. But it also might, like I said, it might matter which quarterback goes 3. If the right quarterback goes 3, and so the right quarterback is quarterback 4, that might change the math a little bit. So I think that's, if you're Arizona, obviously you have, you're picking 4th, so you have you're a little bit ahead in the pecking order there. But and Monty's done this before. Obviously, he did it last year, so there's a little bit more experience with him. With the Chargers, we've got a brand new regime. We don't really have much of a track record. You got Ortiz, you got Harbaugh. How are they going to manage this? We just don't have as much background with those guys to really understand how they want to attack this draft. How willing are they to move back? They might have their guy targeted at 5, and that's it. We just don't know. So I think the fact that I believe the Cardinals would be okay with any of these top 3 receivers tells me that they'd be more willing to move back to 11 or 12 and then move back up to, say, 8 and still feel great about adding Rome Odunze plus the package of picks this year and next year that they can still build around.
Yeah, they might be okay with that. I would not be okay with that. If that's how this ends up unfolding, I will be a very sad man. You guys will have to pull me out of my shell some point on Thursday. So that's how the top 5 and then maybe the top 4 quarterbacks might shake out. But there are more teams in this process that need quarterbacks. So, Nate, if you're Denver and the Raiders, let's say those are the 2 teams that get shut out of this just because they're not willing to go to the insane place that it feels like the Vikings are probably willing to go. What do you end up doing? Do you feel like it's in that range from at 12 or 13? You take one of these guys? Do you wait till the second round? I know you don't love Nix or Penix, but it feels like with both of these franchises, there's a level of urgency here that could maybe push them to make a decision that on paper feels a little bit rich.
It does feel rich to me. Ideally, like if you were the Broncos, you just wait until day 2, preferably that second round pick. You should have, but you don't. And I think that kind of shows the situation the Broncos are in. We don't have the second round pick to maybe take one of these guys. I've just started calling them the picks tier, the Penix, Nix, Rattler tier, the picks tier, PIX. That's the Pacific Northwest. There we go. But the Broncos, to me, should be taking their medicine, and instead they're slim pickings riding the bomb. The war chest for Russell Wilson, 1st and 2nd for Sean Payton, 3rd rounder for Ellie Moss, another pick for Marvin Mims. But I feel like they should just take their medicine. You're not like, why push it for this? Like for this, with this regime, like you are in year 0, much less year 1 of this team. So I don't see the need to press it. And kind of the same for the Raiders as well. If they love a guy, take him. But I don't think you can have to move up and be desperate. But to me, again, pick 44 where they're at, that's the sweet spot for picks and Rattler. Like that's where I think is the nice area for them. But I don't think they're the types of guys they should move up even into the 20s for because of the red alerts. This is me personally, though. They might feel they are the types of guys to move up in the 20s. I just don't know if that's the right process for them for where they're at in their team building process.
It's interesting because we had so many conversations with the Broncos about the mistake that came with giving carte blanche to a quarterback. You give a guy free reign, what comes along with it? I think now that conversation and that consideration extends to the head coach. You've given the head coach free reign. And even if the sound process might involve them taking their medicine, trading back, getting a couple more picks, we know who's in the driver's seat there and we know how he operates and we know what his mindset is. So that's what throws a wrench into all of this for Denver is that we know what the sound path probably looks like, but we also know the person in charge of driving the car is not interested in the sound path or hasn't been previously.
No. And this New Orleans is just like, let's just keep the good times going. That's
the thing with all those years in New Orleans, we saw them trade future first round pick after future first round pick. I mean, we know Sean Payton is not opposed to using future draft capital to go up and get a guy if you really like him. They just never really did it for a quarterback. They did it for Marcus Davenport. So, what are they willing to go give up for a quarterback they really like. That I don't know. It's really interesting, and I don't like. Yeah, it's tough because the way we view these quarterbacks, the second tier quarterbacks, however you want to word them, is obviously different than each team's going to feel about these quarterbacks, and so figuring out the value system is tough. I know in my 7-round mock, I had the Raiders taking best player available for them at pick number 13, and then using rounds 2 and 3, using those 2 day 2 picks they have to trade up to pick 29 to take Michael Penix. And it's kind of like you're hedging your bet. We're still going to take the best player available in the top 15, taking one of the best players on our board that's available in this top 15 rich draft. But Michael Penix is a quarterback we really, really like, but we're willing to take that chance that he'll still be around late first round. And then, okay, if he is, then we'll find a package of picks to go up and get him. So, but if Penix is a guy that they just absolutely love, and it's not that they really, really like him, they love him, then you almost have to take him at 13 instead of trying to finagle your way to make the best possible situation work out.
What do you think is the more likely outcome? They stick and pick him at 13, or they maneuver back and try to do it a little bit later?
I still think they maneuver, and to me, that makes the most sense to do it that way. I think a lot of teams like Michael Penix. I think he's an easy player to like because of what he did on film. He's everything that he offers. The mental toughness is a big selling point with him. But at the end of the day, actually turning the card in is something totally different. So I am okay hedging my bets, taking that risk that he's still going to be around in the 20s. And if the trade action works out where you can trade a second and a third to move up into the late first to get him, then great. Then all of a sudden our quarterback situation is looking a lot better than it was. But I don't know. To me, that seems most likely. But, we've seen quarterbacks get overdrafted time and time again.
I'm wondering if there's like a secret team out there that we're not thinking about quarterback wise in the back half of the first round, right? Like, let's just throw this out there. What if Seattle likes Michael Penix for reasons that are not hard to connect the dots on? So
Who's
Seattle,
coordinator again?
Yeah,
pretty easy one.
But Seattle, and Geno is in his mid-30s. They're
Right.
committed to him for this year, but who knows what it's going to look like next year. Seattle has never been shy about moving down. They've never been shy about accumulating picks. What if Seattle is, there's a team that really wants a tackle at 17. Where's Seattle? 18?
16.
16. I remember that range of the draft is tough for me. So Seattle is at 16. There's a team that really wants a tackle. Then that run on tackles happens, and they're like, we need to go up and get that guy from 25. Let's say it's Green Bay, for argument's sake. They go back to 25, and they're sitting there being like, Penix, the best guy on the board, best guy for what we do over the next 2 to 3 years. Makes sense. We know what he's going to be. We need a cheap alternative at quarterback. We're kind of hitting the reset button a little bit anyway. Let's do this. That wouldn't shock me. And I think there are probably a couple teams in that range that maybe need a cheap off-ramp at quarterback that we're not thinking about right now. But if they were to do it, it wouldn't knock me on my ass. It would be something like, all right, I get it, even if it was a little bit surprising.
It's the
Minnesota.
Yeah.
Yeah, if Minnesota if they don't work out the deal to go up, say Denver wins out and they go up to get that fourth quarterback, Minnesota still has that 23rd pick. So, they could take Byron Murphy or whoever at number 11, and then at 23rd, take one of these, second tier quarterbacks if they wanted to attack it that way as their kind of plan B consolation prize. So, no, I think your overall point is certainly valid. There is at least a chance that Michael Penix is not making it out of the top 25 regardless.
So this is interesting to me, Nate. This idea of, okay, you have a chance to go get the fourth quarterback if you're Minnesota. In order to do that, you would have to give up 11, 23, potentially a 2025 1, but extra no matter what. So you're giving up 2 firsts and more to go up to 4. Let's say it is JJ McCarthy. Would you rather have Bo Nix and all the other picks Minnesota has for the next 2 years, or go get JJ McCarthy for 2 firsts and change?
McCarthy.
Okay.
It's just that tier difference that McCarthy actually.
You think there is enough of a substantial difference there?
Yeah. Because McCarthy, I understand the argument too, to like there's a starter there. Nick's it's just like, it's harder for me to project that. So McCarthy at least could project that way. So it's worth that trade. Even if the upside is only 14th best guy, I think that's more projectable for him.
It's interesting. I don't have enough of an opinion of Bo Nix to say either way. It's just like that's a lot to give up for the fourth quarterback. But if we think that there is a substantial drop between that group and the next group, then it doesn't matter what the price is. That it's so important to get that guy right that you're willing to pay that sort of tax. What would you do in that situation, Dane?
Probably the same, because again, I get the quarterback right. That's priority number one, and I'm not going to settle for plan B if I can get plan A, even if it does cost a little bit more. At the end of the day, I'm going to feel better about my situation if I went for the guy that I had ranked higher. It's no different than a lot of situations in life. If you have the ability financially to maybe go get a little bit more when you're buying a house or you're buying a car, I think in the end of the day, you will feel better about that you did that. You won't have regrets if you have the financial flexibility to do it, as opposed to settling. But some of these teams do have that. I mean, theoretically, all these teams have future draft picks that they could use. Now, it's still you have to take your medicine, but it's something that if it hits, obviously, I don't think you're too concerned about it.
There's one quarterback, one starting quarterback. That's it. There's two tackles where we're like, oh, we have these guys tiered. Or, like that. There's one quarterback. So, but usually you just have a guy, maybe two guys in a draft like this. But usually you only have one guy. There's not like, we'll just settle for this guy. He'll be a good guard, and it's like, it's just one quarterback. So that he takes every snap. So that's why it's just so hard. Like what Dane's saying, you got to get it right. You're buying the house, you're buying the car. You kind of have to pay the premium if you can.
Yeah. There's some things you don't skimp on. Like I could buy sushi from the gas station. That doesn't mean it's a good idea. Right. So there's some things is worth paying the premium. All right. So we talked about a lot of teams kind of in the top 12-ish range. I want to get outside of the teams that need quarterbacks, though. Which team picking in the top 10, Nate, that is not in the quarterback market, which leaves us with like 4 teams? So let's say the Titans, the Falcons, the Bears, and the Jets. Which of those 4 teams is most intriguing to you? What they're going to come away with from that range in the draft?
All of them, but I'm going to actually go with the Jets. I'm actually going to go with the Jets here. I just want to see what they go with. Is it lined? Is it Brock Bowers? Because I feel like it's down to that. And I just think overall, they're one of the most interesting teams on field and off field stuff. I mean, it's just everything about them. So I feel like this top 10 pick, a year away from a team that thought they were competing going all in, now they have a top 10 pick where they could add something. And so which direction they go, it's super interesting to me. It's just with that selection and then what else they do in the draft.
Dane, does it feel like Bowers at 10 it has become like the most realistic possibility as you think about how this could all unfold? Because that's kind of the place I've drifted to.
Yeah, I think so. I think when you think about a win now team and the situation that they're in, adding another offensive pass catcher, it's not just about, they drafted a tight end. No, they drafted an offensive playmaker, someone that you can drop into this offense and you feel like he's going to pick it up quickly. He's going to be versatile and you can use him in a lot of different ways. I mean, look, they didn't get anything out of their first round pick last year. Will McDonald was a top 15 pick. I mean, who could have saw that coming? I don't know. But Brock Bowers this year,
defensive end on the roster.
Yeah, I mean, I had like a 3rd round grade on him. Like,
oh my god, I remember that.
Brock Bowers, though, he's a difference maker. And so, it feels like it is the good mix of a player that's able to help right away for a team that needs to win right away, but also a pretty good investment because at the end of the day, bet on athletes, bet on the best athletes and the guys that are going to help you score touchdowns. Brock Bowers is going to do that.
There's a reason we talked about him with the top 3 receivers. Like he got included with the receivers and it was worth it. Like, he's a star. Like the thing is, but he's the player that I understand with this kind of Jets thinking. At first I'm like, really? You guys are going to go with another pass catcher? But with Bowers, I'm like, he's a needle mover.
You can see
it makes sense.
So
it makes sense.
To imagine, right?
It's not lull Jets for me. It's more just like, no, actually, I get this one, even if it is risky because of just where you're leaving the line. He's worth it if it does work out because of what the player is.
Just think about the skill sets and how they fit together. And again, this is going to be the caveat with the Jets. If they stay healthy.
Correct.
Mike Williams, Garrett Wilson, Brock Bowers, Tyler Conklin. I could see that. It's not hard for me to imagine at all. And obviously Breece Hall. But the pass catchers and the roles they slot into, I could absolutely see that. Here's the problem, is if you go that route, you're looking at 10 weeks of Carter Warren potentially as your left tackle, we're one Tyron Smith injury away from that being your reality. And it's not like that's a far off possibility. That has become the norm. So that to me is the biggest risk. But Nate, you and I talked about this when we did the mock scenarios. It's like, they probably don't give a shit about the contingency plans, because if they don't win 11 games, everyone's getting fired anyway.
You said that, and I was just kind of like, yeah, duh. Like, yeah. And also they play, at least they don't play on a field that's known for injuries.
That's another good one. One more layer to this Jets thing.
Honestly, Carter Warren might be better suited to play than any of these rookies anyways. I mean, these rookies are very good,
right?
Yes.
But they're still rookies. So a second-year player who is a pretty talented player, he actually might be a better option than these rookies anyways. And
great,
especially,
I don't disagree with that.
Right. So that's part of this as well. And I mean, even, I think Troy Fautanu, because the versatility certainly makes sense. He can fill in a lot of spots, which would be perfect for a team like this, because it seems like you never know which position is going to go down. It could be a tackle, it could be a guard, and you've got a rookie that can help get you 5 best guys out there. But yeah, adding the pass catcher to me it makes too much sense. And I don't know, selfishly, I just want to see it too.
Right.
Yeah, I also kind of do, because I do think that's the most fun outcome for this team specifically. Yeah. Dane, how about you? Which team picking in the top 10 that's not in the quarterback market is the most interesting to you?
Yeah, it's hard not to say all of them, because I mean the Titans, because everyone and their mother has mocked Joe Alt there. So if
my
that
mom
doesn't
did
happen,
have him there in her mock draft. Yeah.
My mom did.
So, okay, if they go receiver there, they mix it up or something else happens there. Atlanta is interesting because we all think it's going to be defense. That's where the first defensive player is likely to come off the board. But which one is it? Is it Dallas Turner? Is it Byron Murphy? Is it, they like both these corners. Could they trade out of that spot for, a team looking to get that third wide receiver right in front of the Bears? And then, of course, you have the Bears at 9, who obviously they got the quarterback, and then they could go in a lot of different directions with that 9th pick. So yeah, it's hard not to mention each one of them. It's a really interesting spot with a lot of potential impact players still on the board and a lot of different ways they could go.
Yeah. My answer is probably the Jets, just because I do think that the different paths they can take are really telling, and I think it shines a light on how they think about this season and themselves. I'm still holding out a shred of hope, just because I've given up on the idea that the third receiver is going to be there at 9. I've stopped thinking it's a possibility.
Isn't that crazy?
But we've come back around.
I mean that in a good way.
Yeah,
it's just like,
we've come back around, because I remember sitting. I don't remember when it was. It was sometime in probably January or February. Something happened where it was pre-combine. I tweeted out something about Rome Odunze. And Dane was like, is he going to be there at 9? And I was like, why would you do this to me? Let me have this for 10 minutes. I'm trying to have a good time over here. And then all through the combine, it felt like, okay, they would have to do something, the Bears at 9, to come up and make sure they get one of these guys. And then when all the smoke happened about the quarterbacks, it's like, okay, maybe that third receiver will still be there. But then you think about all the teams that might be motivated to come make a play in front of Chicago. With the Titans pick, with Atlanta's pick, it's like, all right, well, they stay put. They're probably screwed, and they don't have the capital that other teams do to potentially move around in the top 5. So it's funny that 2 months
Pepe
later,
Sylvia.
Like I haven't spent any time thinking about this, by the way. I haven't considered any of the possibilities, but it's so funny that 2 months later, we've now arrived all the way back at stage 1, when it feels like you can't wait to 9 or 10 to get the third receiver. We're just back in the exact place that we started.
It's fun. Isn't it great? It's not like everyone just sits here and thinks about it.
I still am not giving up hope at the idea of the Bears trading next year's Panthers 2 to move up from like 9 to 5.
Oh, you're all in on this. You want this so bad.
I've seen it. I see it in my mind. And there was
you see what Caleb tweeted today?
I saw the Roma dudes, I think, today. And I also saw there was a story that Dan Wiederer wrote in the Chicago Tribune. I'm really peppy being this. And Poles was talking about how important it is to surround the guy with the right supporting cast. I was like, oh, he knows. He knows what he needs to come away with here. All right, let's extend this a little bit further back in the first round.
I love it. I don't know. You sound like Del Griffith from Planes, Trains, and Automobiles.
Yeah,
selling the shower ring.
I have a very John Candy energy to me. The people have always said that.
I love
mustache and everything. Yeah,
and the mustache now too. So let's
my Pepe Sylvia moment was Joe Alt to the Titans though, with Bill Callahan, offensive line coach, Joe Rudolph's offensive line coach for Notre Dame. They go way back. That was his coach in college at Wisconsin. I can't believe I didn't even put that one together. So I was like, oh, but it wasn't anything new. So it was kind of like, yeah. Oh, everybody's been mocking Joel to the Titans anyway. So it's
But
not
even
like
with the Titans, right? So I was talking to Diana about this week. You can do your own crazy like speculation thing with the Titans. They have probably, we could hem and haw about this, the best developer of offensive line talent in the NFL in terms of getting playable, workable play from the most amount
the
of
best
guys.
resume of that. Yes.
Yes, he probably is that. You have a head coach who at every stop has had a front office or a team prioritize pass catchers and how they've built the roster. He was in Denver with Peyton Manning when they had Wes Welker, Demaryius Thomas, and Eric Decker. He was in Detroit when Calvin Johnson was there getting thrown the ball by Matthew Stafford. And then he was in Cincinnati when they drafted Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. DeAndre Hopkins is 33 years old. He's not on the roster next year. So I would not be shocked if the Titans were like, fuck it. We're taking whoever one of the receivers is. We'll wait to round 2 to get one of the tackles because that's what we're paying the big man to do.
It's an easy argument to make, though, right?
It really is.
Yeah. You think about where's the head coach come from? Cincinnati, who, they went with the wide receiver over the offensive lineman in the 2021 draft, and that worked out okay for them. So,
and now they got juiced up line coach. Cincinnati is very good, but now they got one of the best ever. Yeah. No, that's why you pay him though. You go, this is why we're paying you this much coordinator money, low head coach money probably to develop these guys. So we'll give you a day 2 guy. Who's your favorite day 2 guy? Dad. Like that's like, sorry, but it's such a funny dynamic to me. It's awesome.
It really is.
It is.
I guarantee it does. From what I've heard, though, Bill has had a good time with this.
The
fact that they know they need an offensive lineman somewhere along the way, and he's kind of been like just a kid in a candy store. Like, you go figure out what you want to do. You come back and you let us know. It sounds like he's had a good time throughout this process.
That's probably
all right. Let's scale back here. Let's move outside of the top 10. This was not in the outline, but I want to spring this on you because I feel like we're leaving too many teams on the table. And this is a different question than what I'm going to ask after. Dane, which pick in the top 10, just a team at their current slot in the top 32, are you most interested in right now?
Outside the top 10?
Yeah.
Cowboys at 24? It feels like it's so important that they get it right. Like
sure
it feels like it's a you can't screw this up type of pick for the Cowboys. And Will McClay has done such an outstanding job. He's got so many smart people under him, and that whole staff is great. But it's certainly a gamble that Jerry's taking, leaning so much on this draft class, specifically that first round pick, having to hit pretty quickly for a team that needs to win right away. So what they do at 24, whether it's the offensive line, whether it's do they make a surprise pick, surprise all of us, and maybe they still have a first round graded player on the board that they can't pass on. I don't know. The Cowboys at 24, I can't wait to see what they do.
That's a good one. And that you're right. And it's because it's so important. Like they need that guy to come in and be a day 1 starter. And it feels like that guy has to be a day 1 starter along the offensive line, but maybe I'm wrong about that. Maybe they just do something completely out of left field and they just tell us to go screw ourselves.
I think they're crossing their fingers that, a Graham Barton, a Troy Fautanu, one of those guys, maybe Fuaga, one of those guys maybe falls just a little bit further than most of us think. I think they're crossing their fingers that happens because, like an Amarius Mims, a Guyton, some of these other guys are more developmental players that it's not going to be as easy as just throw them out there and, let's see what happens. Like that's not going to be able to happen for this team. So
they're kind of just
I don't know
that sweet spot too, like just outside of it. Like, yeah.
Right. So I wouldn't count out them trading up 5-6 spots if they can, because it's so important they get it right for the right player. Absolutely. I could see them making a move.
Yeah, they don't have their own 4th or 5th. I'm not sure where those went, but they have fewer picks than you would want to be moving around the draft. So there's a chance that if they did that, they would have to dip into the 2025 capital a little bit.
More related. I don't even know.
Nate, where are you going with this?
Oh
the
my goodness!
Pick outside of the top 10 in the first round you're most interested in.
I think this is awesome about this draft and what speaks about this draft and why Thursday is going to be a lot of fun. It's just I could go so many directions here. Really, it's that 17 through 19 range: Jags, Bengals, Rams.
Yeah, it's a good one.
So I can't really pick between those three. So why not talk about all of them? All of them. Do the Jags? I feel like they're going to go corner, but it's like, there's the receiver. Does Trent Baalke kind of stomp on the haters and move up? Something like that. Go receiver, something like that. But I think they'll go corner. But that's so interesting to me because it's just where they're as a franchise. The Bengals, I think the T. Higgins stuff, the Tyler Boyd not being there now. Okay, do they figure out the receiver spot, but are they going to be offensive line like that? Do they go defensive line? There's a couple, they're in the sweet spot for actually all those positions to me. Maybe not receiver, they're kind of a no man's land there, but man, they could just find some avenues that all make sense to me. And the Rams, what are you guys going to do? You guys have your picks. So what are you going to do? Like, are they going to be aggressive? Are they going to just stick to that mindset that they always have? Are they going to push the last hurrah with Matthew Stafford? Are they going to find something for the future? The Rams kind of go by their own beat, and it's kind of worked for them very recently. So kind of want to see what they do this entire draft.
The Rams have that extra third round comp pick, and I think they got more comp picks coming at some point. Maybe this year is the one where they have 5 comp picks total. They have a lot of draft capital, even if it's a little bit further down the draft. I haven't given up your dream, Nate, of the Rams doing something in this process to get Brock Bowers. I have not given up that dream. I feel like with the ammo they have, if he starts to slip a little bit, is that something they could make happen?
God, that would, it's not.
You have to get in front of what? Have to get in front of Indy at 15.
I think that's right.
Yeah,
I think that's right. Yeah. And we know the Saints aren't trading down, so you'd have to figure out somebody ahead of that you'd be able to make a move.
I think Schefter gave it the hard. Brock Bowers' range starts at 10. And goes to 16, I think he said, or 17 or somewhere right there. But he said
10
a very
15. To me, that's the spot. Yeah.
It'd be hard to see him slipping past the Colts for me.
It
would be hard for me to imagine that based on the way they deploy players, based on their current tight end depth chart, and based on what their offense needs. It would be hard for me to imagine him slipping.
He's different than a normal tight end. He's adding juice. Like it's not a typical tight end where you're like, oh, he's maybe a seam stretcher and like a Hawkinson. It's like this is a guy that's going to be a yak guy too, and that's why he's Bowers. He's just different.
Jacksonville is up there for me with my answer here because what are they going to do positionally? Do they make a move? They're the team, and there may be other teams in this as well. Is there a team? We've talked about this already on a couple different shows. A team outside the top 10. That is willing to make a strike for one of the receivers, that is willing to make like a big time play for one of those top 3 guys. And is Jacksonville potentially one of those teams? Mm-hmm. So they're one I have circled. I'm interested in what Seattle does just because of the regime change. Like if they pick a defensive player, which defensive player is it? Why are they taking that defensive player? I've always curious about that with somebody coming in and running a different sort of system on one side of the ball. And like this being the first expression of what that system is going to look like. But I'm with you guys. It's a hard question to answer, which is why I wanted to ask it. Let's pivot this a tiny bit and move beyond one specific pick. Overall draft haul, Dane, that you are most interested in. What a team does across the 7 rounds and across all of their picks.
I think Washington, just because they have 6 picks in the top 100, how do they maximize all that draft capital? Having 2 picks in, obviously, we think they're going to take a quarterback at 2, but then they have 2 picks in the early second round. What do they package those 2 picks and look to get back into the first for a tackle or somebody else they have highly rated? Or they just stick and pick with those 2 picks? And then with 2 third rounders, they got a chance to really affect this roster. So they're in an enviable spot to have 6 picks in the top 100, including the number 2 overall pick to take the best quarterback in this draft, not named Caleb Williams. That's pretty interesting. And so what do they do to maximize that? The other team, I was going to mention the Chargers, just to see the weirdness of Harbaugh, because it feels like he's not conventional about anything. So I want to see how they attack this draft, how they feel like they need to build it to be the team he wants to be. And then also just see how many Michigan players they draft. I think it's a fun storyline. What's the over under? Is it 3.5, 4.5? I think that's.
I was gonna say I'll put it at 3.5. Are you going over?
3.5 is insane. So you think they may take 4 players from one school in this draft? Who would even the
Maybe
4
two,
players
maybe
be?
2.5, maybe 2.5 might be the line.
Corum and Junior Colson, right?
Colson and
Those are feasible based on where
Yes,
they're
I
picking.
think with the third round, if Corum's there, it just feels like it's a done deal. I don't know.
Right.
But and then the second round pick is like 37 between Junior Colson, Chris Jenkins, and Mikey Sainer still. It feels like one of those guys is going to be a Charger at 37.
They're all positions of need because every single position is a position of need for the Chargers.
Yes,
so
exactly. So I think, those 2 second and third round picks, I don't think would surprise anybody if they're Michigan players. And then it just becomes on day 3. I don't know. It'll be interesting.
You stole both of my answers, so I'm gonna have to figure out another one. Nate, which team other than the Chargers or Washington are you most interested in their overall approach and overall haul from this draft?
Really, the entire NFC North, but we've already kind of talked about Bears and Vikings and obviously what they do at the top. And that's,
I was waiting to hear about the Cardinals from you.
Yeah. Oh man, the Cardinals too. But we kind of hinted at that one too. But really, all my answers were NFC too. Like the Rams were another one, the Seahawks were another one, but we've kind of already hinted at those. So continuing NFC North, Packers at 25. Do they just go tackle, which I think is likely, but they have 2 second rounders as well.
Yeah, I was gonna say, and not just 25. They got a shitload of picks.
2 second rounders, 2 third rounders. What do they do with them? They'll move up. They very recently moved up for Christian Watson. That sent some groans with me and Dane, and now he's on one of my dynasty rosters, and I'm like, what am I doing with my life?
Traitor.
Yeah. Oh man, I know that one was tough. But yeah, do they go? Yeah, tackle early. I think they will. Which lineman did they go with? That's also curious. Packers kind of go for their own flavors, and they also usually don't take guys up top because they never have to, and they're spoiled. They just take day 2 and day 3 guys, and they turn into starters that can start at multiple spots. So I'm just curious where they go. And then also lines, who feel like they're on the cusp. I feel like they feel like they're on the cusp. They kind of do things their own way. And are they going to keep adding to the defense? Are they going to restock the O-line? O-line could be interesting because of Hank Fraley. Just like we talked about Bill Callahan, he's kind of earning that reputation to me as a guy that can develop these guys, these offensive linemen, their offensive line coach. So do they add another receiver? The Lions, again, Brad Holmes he'll tell you, does kind of everything by his own kind of beat, his own big board. And same with Dan Campbell, their whole kind of brain trust. So curious what the Lions do as well. So I'm just going to go with the entire NFC North. Sorry if I stole your answer.
No, the Lions are good. The Packers are a really good one because the Packers have all those picks. And if they can get a starting offensive lineman in the first round, a defensive difference maker somewhere in the second round, and you drop that into what they already have, it's pretty scary, man.
Yeah.
I mean, that team won a playoff game. It beat the hell out of the Cowboys on the road and then gave the Niners all they could stand with all these dudes who are like 24 years old. And now they have another potential influx of talent coming. It's maddening. It just drives me absolutely insane.
And they could do stuff with these picks. Like they have ammo to be creative if they want to. It's just, it's where you want to be.
I like the Lions too, because last year was so good that it's like, okay, what are you going to do now to follow that up? It's like, the original movie was so good that, there's no way the sequel can live up to it.
Right.
And obviously the draft capital is much different for them this year, but still, I want to see how the Lions attack this draft to kind of complement what they did last year.
I'm gonna put 3 teams in together and be annoying because I think they're 3 teams in a similar spot. I'm curious how the Bengals, the Bills, and the Ravens approach this. All right, so we are
the paid quarterback teams.
Yeah, we're paid quarterback. We're all in teams in transition, right? Like all of those teams. Maybe not the Bengals. The Bengals, I think, did a good job of kind of restocking the cupboard, even though they lost some guys in free agency. But T. Higgins is going to be on the way out, right? So there are either this year or next year, all 3 of those teams, there's been some attrition with the talent because they can't afford everybody. Baltimore's lost a ton of guys. I mean, you look at the players that Baltimore has lost and how few guys they've added in free agency because of the financial constraints. It's a big draft for them. This is a team that was the number 1 seed in the AFC last year. We all thought that last year was their year. They lose their defensive coordinator. They lose a bunch of pieces. Are we going to look back at that 2023 Ravens season and say that was their best shot? Or are they going to be able to use this draft and the next couple to make sure that the train keeps going? And Buffalo is clearly in a period of transition, right? Like Buffalo's in that spot now where people in Buffalo would tell you, we're not worse. We're just a little bit younger and a little bit cheaper. We think we're going to be just as good. And that's always a great line. And I understand that has to be the company line, but in order to make good on that sort of approach, you're going to need to nail this. And in order for you to be a contender again next season, for next season not to be a significant step back, you're going to have to come away from this draft with a couple starters and make sure you restock the cupboard. So all three of those teams, the teams in pursuit of Mahomes after already paying their quarterback, I think those are the teams I'm most interested in, other than the ones that 7 you guys have already listed off.
The Bills they're so interesting because and especially when you factor in, we know how aggressive the GM, Brandon Beane, likes to be moving up to go get his guy. Can he maybe hold it back a little bit because he knows, okay, we need that second rounder, we need that third, we need all these draft picks to help build the roster? Or is he's just going to screw it, let's go get him, let's go get our Brian Thomas, let's go get our whoever it may be, to make sure he's adding the players that he feels necessary for this team to take that next step in a Stephon Diggs world in Buffalo. So yeah, I don't know, but Buffalo is really interesting.
Yeah,
I wonder, because I could see it both ways. They've got some extra, 5th round picks just in their pockets because the Ryan Bates trade, the Russell Douglas trade, they gave up a 3 but got a 5 back. So they could maneuver around a little bit. Or do they look at, all right, we're at 28 and we're at 60. Do we move back into the second round and then pick up an extra 3rd somewhere along the way? So then we have 5 picks in the top 4 rounds, and we're just giving ourselves dice rolls to add cheap talent to the roster. I can understand both arguments for saying we need a difference maker. Our only way to get a difference maker from 28 is to move up. We're tired of picking in 25 and later and getting B+ players. Like, we got to do something to change that. Or do they look at the roster construction and say, we have so many holes that we have to be patient in the way that they handle this? That'll be fascinating to see which one plays out.
Especially depending on how that next tier of receiver, because it's the top 3. That's the Brian Thomas, I'm all by myself tier. And then it's kind of like, AD Mitchell, but who might be off some boards or might be just lower on some boards because other stuff like can't be, consistency and all those types of things. But then if I'm picking at 28 and I want to take a Ladd McConkey, I want to take a Keon Coleman. I'm just throwing names out here. I want to take out a Troy Franklin. I'm just throwing all these kind of names in this tier. Jalen Polk, but that's maybe a little rich. But if I get into 38, 36, somewhere around there, just throwing out numbers, that's a lot more tolerable for me for that tier. It seems like just splitting hairs, but it's not. It's dropped back.
It's not at all, because then that's extra third that's safety depth.
Exactly.
That's some other interior defensive lineman. Like that's not a bad way to think about it.
It's just the human psyche thing. And I hate this, but it's true. Now that receiver, if you do take him, doesn't have that 1 in front of their name, 1-28, it's 2 now. It's just the lower expectations just for the fan base. Just for Bills Mafia a little bit, just going, okay, this guy, okay, he's a second rounder, guys. He's going to take some time, but if he has a first rounder in front of him, oh my God, all right, he's our dude right away. Just talking about just some of those types of things about the kind of the human element of this.
This is the part of the conversation where it's like a reminder that everyone's board looks so different. I mean, the Bills' 5th receiver might be Ricky Pearsall, and like it's maybe just different than everybody else's, and so they're perfectly fine moving back 6-7 spots and getting him there. And a player that if they had to stay put in the late first round, they would have taken him anyways at that spot. So all these receiver boards are as much as we get attached to where we think they're going to go based on how all these mocks have played out. These boards look so different team to team that who knows how the Bills wide receiver board looks.
And for
such
what
an
team
interesting
need
point, Nate. Because you look at where Quentin Johnston, let's say Quentin Johnston goes where Jonathan Mingo went last year. Right. How much different is the discussion around Quentin Johnston if that's how it plays out? And that's the same sort of case with all these guys. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a really good, it's a good
way to think. He wasn't polished, so that's why he's going to take some time. But hey, when you're a receiver, one of the first guys off the board, then all of a sudden, get ready to go.
All right, I'm going to exclude Brock Bowers from this conversation because I think that outside of Brock Bowers and the quarterbacks, those are probably the 2 easy answers. Dane, other than those guys, which player's landing spot, either pick number or team, are you most interested to see?
Okay, so I've got 2 guys here. Brian Thomas Jr., receiver. He being that the guy we believe will be that 4th receiver off the board, could be on a tier by himself. there have been teams in the top 10 that have brought him in for 30 visits. Could he fall out of the top 18 picks? Maybe. So just where does he land? I feel like there's such a wide range of spots for him. And it's not really, I haven't seen it out there, but several teams have flagged him for medical reasons. So that's just another kind of something to keep in mind as the first round plays out. If Brian Thomas maybe were to slip a few picks, that could be a reason. So just something to keep in mind there. And then Byron Murphy, I cannot wait to see where he ends up. Realistically, he could go 8 to Atlanta. I can't see him getting past 18 and the Bengals. Somewhere in the 8 to 18 range is where he's going to go. A juicy one is at number 9. Let's just say the Colts trade up to 8, okay, for the third receiver. And so at number 9, what do the Bears do? I know they like Byron Murphy. I know they do. And you think about that 3 technique for Eberflus and that defense, that scenario, Byron Murphy being the first defensive player off the board at number 9 wouldn't surprise me. So it's just, there's a lot of those, if the Vikings can't get a deal done, they have to stay at 11. He would be a great fit there. There's a lot of landing spots for Byron Murphy that you could sell me on that makes sense. So it'll be interesting to see just where exactly he ends up.
Yeah, I've gotten ready for that. I've emotionally prepared myself for that, and I've talked myself into it because
a lot of sense there.
I do think that edge is still the biggest need on the entire roster. Like I still believe that, still firmly believe that and even though they've spent a lot of picks on interior defensive linemen recently in Chicago, if Zach Pickens now becomes your 4th defensive tackle, okay, like that's fine. Like if that is the biggest difference maker you can draft along the defensive line, if you think Byron Murphy is that guy, I'm totally fine drafting him, even if edge isn't or defense tackle isn't the biggest screaming need if you just look at their depth chart right now.
He's a different flavor than what they have too.
Totally. There are a lot of bigger guys, not a lot as both of those guys, Dexter and Pickens, are just big
monsters.
Dudes. Yeah. It's just a different sort of player. And I think that's a really good point.
Yeah, but oh man, putting Murphy next to Montez Sweat on one side, like that's because that's the type of synergy you want. You want the shooter with the plugger. And like that's your investment. Those are essentially your top 2 picks on defense this year. That works, that would totally works for me. I think that's a really fun one.
All right, Nate, what's your answer here? The player whose landing spot you're most curious about outside of Brock Bowers?
The non-Brock Bowers category. Well, JJ McCarthy. Where is he?
I said no quarterbacks.
You said no quarterbacks too? Okay,
yes,
good.
Yes.
Because those were my top 2 answers. And I was like, I feel like these need caveats. So JC Latham from Alabama, because I know he has fans, but I also know he has people, including I'm one of the fans, but he also has people that look at him and go, no, that's not going to work, which at tackle, I mean. So just because he's such a big body, he looks more like a guard, but I truly think because of his footwork and how strong he is, and he's a much better athlete than his body type shows, that he could stay out there at tackle. Him, and just where do all the linemen end up? Like, where does the run end up? Who goes where? Like, again, just like we're talking about with the receivers, offensive linemen, it's just all about the flavor. So like JC Latham to me though is kind of just one flavor that who likes him. I know some people are going to like him, maybe some more old school guys, like a Bill Callahan, but I think all makes a lot more sense there. But just like a like those types of guys, they might really like it. Harbaugh might really like him because he's just that power tackle. True. I would say, he could play the left side because of his athleticism. I really do think that, but just that type of play style, I'm just curious where that ends up actually.
Yeah. How that run happens and just how they're picked, like the order they all go in, because Dane, I'm sure you've gone through this a million different times in your head. It feels like how many offensive tackles are worthy of top 25 picks? 7, right? Or offensive linemen, 7 about. So how many different iterations is that possibly? It's a lot. If you did the math on that, there are a lot of different ways that can unfold. So
even if you know the first one off the board, right? Even if you know Alt is going to be the first one, after that, it's just, it's all over the place. And depending on what you want, what you need, the scheme that you run, the style of offense you want to be, that's it. All those factors come into play. And, and I think the Chargers are a great example. If say the Chargers trade back to 11 with the Vikings. So and say Alt's off the board, no other offensive lineman off the board at that point. Like, who would the Chargers take? I could see them preferring JC Latham. I could see them preferring Fuaga because he's such an ass kicker in the run game. I could see them looking at Fautanu and saying, oh yeah, that versatility is exactly what we need. That you can make a case for a lot of different offensive linemen as early as 11, and then it's going to continue all the way through. So yeah, there's no doubt the offensive linemen and how they come off the board, that's going to be one of the wild cards of the first round.
The Fuaga one's funny too, because actually what Oregon State does translates exactly what Harbaugh loves to do. And so it's just like, again, it's like, I might see him more as a guy I would take early 20s, but they might go, this is perfect. He's plug and play. We can do this, blah, 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 blah. So again, it's just all about preference with these guys too. Some guys like a lot, the Shanahan offensive line coaches prefer a totally different type than the Callahans and the Harbaughs of the world. So again, a guy like a Jordan Morgan later in the 20s might bump up way above other guys that we'd be wildly, or we expected to go higher than him. So it just depends on the preference with these guys.
I think the over under in Vegas for offensive linemen in the first round's 10.5, which is crazy.
That's crazy. I mean, that's absolutely crazy.
Record
over unders. Right? I want to say Fuaga has the second highest over under for draft slot among all the offensive linemen after Joe Alt. I think it's like 12.5.
Yeah.
And Latham is right there too. So they're all really
14 and a half, 15 and a half, 16 and a half. Yeah, they're all around that mid-teens.
A lot of those guys you mentioned, I think were probably names that out there. I'll do two more because just because we have to give an homage to him at the end of this process. Cooper DeJean, who we mentioned on every single draft show for 2 months.
Joe DiMaggio.
Where Cooper DeJean is going, I think is going to be really fun. And I'm very curious what happens with AD Mitchell, because right now it feels like the smoke is he could fall out of the first round entirely because of some of the concerns that teams have about him. But it takes one.
Yeah.
It takes one. It takes one team to look at him and say, that guy has the bones of a number one receiver in the NFL. No one else that I could find in the second round does. That's all it takes, is one team to come away thinking that. And I don't think that's a crazy conclusion based on his skill set and what he can provide to you. So I'm really interested to see where he ends up for that reason.
I can't wait. But those are two good ones. Because Nate, what would you give me your best guess? What is the range for DeJean in terms of drafts? Like, how early could you see him going, and then what's the latest you could see him going? Sorry, I'm putting you on the spot here, but to me, DeJean's interesting.
17 might be the earliest tippy top of his range, but really, I would say realistically might be more the Eagles at 22, and then is kind of be the next 10 picks. Like, I would say that's his realistic range, is like 22 to 30-ish. But I see
you kind of want to see what McDonald could do with him, though, if he went to Seattle at 16.
Exactly. The tippy top might be 16 or 17, like, because like the Jags could use him, like, just for multiple spots potentially down the road, so it's that's kind of the range where I could see him at. Man, McDonald with him would be phenomenal. Yeah. I just have Graham Barton going there in my head. So
I get that. But that's just the team that with the defensive player they pick, I'm just like, ooh, why him? I get that whenever they make that choice.
Seattle's going to move back anyway, so
exactly.
They'll get him at 21.
They're going to take some off-ball linebacker that we're like, oh wow, all right.
The one other guy I would throw out, just because I want to see what one team potentially thinks about him, is Latu. Like, is Latu is somebody does Atlanta just take him at 8? Like, is there one team that just talks themselves into the refinement and the skill as a pass rusher and say, I'm betting on this? I understand some of the concerns. I'm betting on this. He's another one where I'm curious about what that's going to look like.
Yeah.
The medicals have been really interesting. I've heard from several teams that are like, yeah, he's on our board. He's good to go. Other teams, too risky for us. So it's kind of, like we thought, like some teams are going to be okay. Some teams aren't. But yeah, what does that mean for his eventual draft landing spot? Yeah, that's interesting. It'll be interesting, and that's definitely one of the wild cards of the first round.
Dane, one other name I'd throw out, somebody that you've had a fascination with throughout this process, and he's going to be a huge risk reward for somebody in this process. Where Marius Mims goes is also something I think all of us are going to be watching on night one.
No doubt, and it's, again, you can't coach up the traits, the size, everything that he has to offer, but you have to be a little bit patient. You have to be able to take your lumps while he learns and gains more experience. So who's going to be okay doing that, and how early in the draft? So yeah, his landing spots could be as early as the early teens, or maybe the late 20s. I mean, none of those spots would really be too surprising because he's so physically gifted, yet so inexperienced. And so there's a risk involved here that a lot of teams in the first round just aren't interested in.
Man, Mitchell and Mims are kind of like cut from the same cloth, just and not as far as just like perfectly exactly personalities or anything, but as far as just like the argument for them is
how easy is talking stuff into it.
Yeah, in the 20s, I usually don't have an all-pro upside here. Like that, like I am making a tackle and receiver. Usually you have to take these guys very early on. That's the bet you're making. So it's all about ecosystem. It's all about the things that you have, the resources you have. But the teams that are set up for it, it's like they could find something with these guys if they hit right.
If he goes to the Eagles at 22, it's like, oh, perfect. Like it just makes so much sense. Like I understand this for the team, perfect spot for the player.
From Georgia.
Yeah, exactly. They only take Georgia players. So yeah, exactly. In my 7-round mock, I had him taking 2 Georgia players with their first 2 picks on purpose for that reason. So it makes sense.
At this point, Dane's just trying to entertain himself with the 7-round mock. That's really all he's going for.
That's it. I'm in my office at 2 a.m. laughing to myself. Yeah,
I always love seeing who he has at pick 100 or at number 100 or number 50. The last guy on his big board is always the guy I scroll down to just to see who he sneaks in there.
Getting outside of the player pool a little bit, the prospect pool. One of the other big questions that I have is, are we going to see any veteran trades? I mean, what is that going to look like? Is there going to be a decently big name moved on draft night? Obviously, the one that has been thrown around a ton over the last couple of weeks is, what are the Niners going to do with Brandon Ayuk? I still feel like if I were San Francisco and I was doing this as a cost-cutting move, I would rather trade Debo for less and give Ayuk that contract. You save a ton of money. It's $20 million against the cap this year for San Francisco. That's Debo's base salary. I think it's like 25 next year, and that would allow you to afford Ayuk. But if they're not willing to do that because the returns for Debo aren't going to be there, and they can get a first-round pick for Ayuk and potentially replace him with whoever they draft in that spot, then that market should be massive. Like the amount of teams that should be in on their first-round pick and $30 million for Brandon Ayuk is like in the double digits to me. But we know how I feel about him, and maybe that's informing this process. But I think that to me is the biggest name. Nate, is there anybody else you're looking at for guys that could potentially get moved over those 2 days?
No, it was Ayuk because it's all I could think about. It's like, this guy actually might get traded. And that's kind of just I like what you just said there about the Debo thing, like where I would much rather have Ayuk on my team. I love Debo, don't get me wrong. But Ayuk to me is a star outside receiver. And it's kind of Debo. It also has injury stuff every single year. Which guy would I rather invest in? The outside receiver that's really hard to find. That could be a number 1 X that also is young, ascending, and we're about to get him under cost control. Not cost control, but under contract. So to me, it's Ayuk. But I was trying to like really rack my brain of who else can move. And it kind of just everything kind of got shored up the last kind of month.
Yeah, so there aren't that many. Like it feels like the Bengals just aren't willing to move Higgins. I was looking at free agents for next year. There aren't that many names. Is there anybody that comes to mind for you, Dane, that you've been looking at?
I was gonna say, is this where we have the Patrick Surtain converation? On my ride up here to Detroit, I listened to podcasts, listened to a couple of my good friends, Robert Mays and Diana, talk about the possibility of Patrick Surtain, if he would be involved in a trade, if Denver gets to that point where it's like, okay, we don't have a second rounder this year, to really sweeten the pot, let's go this route where we trade our star player and maybe whatever the package may be around him to get this deal done. Is that what it's going to take to go get the quarterback? It would be so hard to do it, but I'm sure it's been at least talked about between Denver and other teams.
The Cardinals, that makes a lot of sense for.
And that's the one we were talking about with.
Okay.
Because if that you're Arizona, and you're Arizona, you're sitting there at 4. Diana and I had this conversation yesterday. You have so many picks. You've had so many picks over the last couple of years. You have infinite cap space. You will never be able to spend the cap space that you currently have. This is where the Bears were last year. It's why they wanted a player as part of that deal. It's like, we can only have so many picks because we're going to have $110 million in space. Like we need... You want players who are worth spending that money on. Look at what Arizona did in free agency this year. I'm not shitting on it. Sean Murphy Bunting, Justin Jones, Bilal Nichols, like that, and Jonah Williams, right? So they're fine.
I always say get on base. They are just trying to make contact.
That's where they are. And so they have this ocean of space, even with the Murray deal. Spending $23 million a year on Patrick Surtain as part of that haul, I think is probably a smarter path than another late second, first round pick. And that's where the Broncos could get in on this. That's where they might have the firepower to make something like this happen if they were willing to include him. That's tough. If you're a Broncos fan, he's the best player in your team. He's one of the only good players on your team. Stomaching that is difficult. But guess what's even more difficult? Stomaching another 3 years of shitty quarterback play. Like, you got to make a compromise somewhere along the way here. And I'm not surprised that Sean Payton, with where he needs to get to this year and where he needs to get that roster to, would be willing to do something like this. Him specifically, I think, has the makeup to do something in this realm in the way that other people might not.
It'd be tough. It'd be so tough to do. I mean, you have to really.
He didn't draft him.
Quarterback. No, he didn't. Well, and that's also says something about the power structure in Denver, because the GM who did draft him is still there. So that would be, man, because you don't let good players leave, but quarterback position, you better get it right. And if they love a quarterback that much, then it's at least part of the discussion as you work your way through this. But man, yeah, it'd be tough to just sign off on a trade like that.
And we've talked about corners and the market for corners and how cool it's gotten. The corner market has stagnated in where other premium positions have continued to trend up. And Surtain was supposed to be the one who would change that. And so the idea that a team would be willing to include him in a trade like this, I think, would be another interesting data point in the way that we think about that position and how it's viewed across the league.
That's what I was kind of trying to maybe say. That's interesting that is the thing that pushes it over. That's used as the collateral or the resource, as opposed to no, you can't, that's untouchable. The corner. It's that's how valuable quarterbacks are. That's pretty much every position probably is on the table if the circumstances are there. But
that's exactly right. I think that's a good way to think about it.
It's not just Surtain's good. It's any way you shake it, top 3 corner in the league. And to me, he's cornerback 1 and 2 is Sauce. But I think he's the dude. So the fact that he's even available tells you just where quarterbacks are, and also where the Broncos are at as well. And also where the situation that they put themselves in as well.
Shines light on both of those things.
Yeah.
If you're Denver, you're thinking about, okay, you're trying to talk yourself into it, saying, okay, think about the money we're going to save now. We don't have to worry about paying him all that, it's that you have to really talk yourself into it. And that poor defensive coordinator having that conversation with him.
Just throw another blitz at it.
Yeah. No, listen, if anyone knows how to run an NFL defense without cornerbacks, it's Vance Joseph after those last couple of years in Arizona. So he'd be living a life he's very comfortable and familiar with. All right.
Race to 70. That's every game.
Listen, they had one last year. They lost
that race.
Yeah. Before we get out of here, Dane, give me a bold prediction or two for what you think might happen on draft night 1 of the draft.
Okay, so the over-under on quarterbacks in the first round is 5.5. I'm taking the under. I don't know how bold that is, but oh well. I have a hard. I think Penix will get in there. I just have a hard time seeing Nix get in there. And then Nix is fascinating on day 2. I don't know where he lands exactly, but I'm going to say under on the 5.5. I've mentioned Marshawn Nealon 1,000 times. I don't know if it's going to happen, but I think it's at least possible, because I know how several teams, not all teams, but I know how several teams feel about him. So I think it's possible that he sneaks in there. And then I wouldn't be surprised if we see a linebacker go Thursday night. We've talked so much about how it's not a great class, but Junior Colson being that true green dot player, the versatility of an Edgerrin Cooper from A&M, just, all it takes is one team where they look at it, and that's exactly what we need for our defense, whether it's the Cowboys, the Packers. There are several teams in the final 10 picks or so in the first round where you can see the fit. So you factor in, this isn't a great linebacker class. We don't really want to wait for rounds 3, rounds 4, and getting plans C, D, E. We want to let's just take our guy now. We feel great about who we're adding to our defense. I think it becomes more possible as we kind of look at it through that lens.
especially if the Chargers trade down into the 20s somewhere, and then
Yeah.
it's even more possible.
Yep.
Nate, give me one bold prediction.
Yeah, I had a similar kind of bold one, whereas I have the under on the quarterbacks as well. But I actually was going even more bold. I'll go under 4.5 quarterbacks are taken. So yeah, I'll add a little bit spice to that one. But
Not buying the Penix hype.
I'm not. Maybe it's again just me just talking to myself. I don't know. It just seems noisy. Just seems a little too noisy right now. But that's just me again, reading my own cuckoo. This is my Pepe Silvia. But I would just say the offense. I would say the offensive players selected in the first round record will be broken, and not only just broken, which I think it's at 19 right now. So I think it would not only be 20 players selected on offense in the first round. I think 22 offensive players will be selected in the first round. So I think they'll shatter that record just based on how that's fallen. I don't know if that's bold. I just kind of want to throw that out there. I think we're just also the first trade up is not for a quarterback. It's my bold prediction. The first trade up is not for a quarterback.
For a receiver?
Yeah, it'll probably be for a receiver. And my fan fiction that I'm writing right now.
That's also my personal fan fiction. So
Oh.
I totally support that. That's not that wasn't my prediction. But again, we talked about the Bears going from 9 to 5 potentially, and what that might look like for a team. It's not really a bold prediction, but I think all 3 receivers will be gone by pick 8, and I think someone will come up to 8 from somewhere. I don't know how far they're coming from. I don't know what team it is. I don't know if it's the Colts. I don't know if it's the Jags. I don't know what team it is, but some team is going to be like, we need this. These guys are different. We need this. This is our chance to add this sort of player. That they should, right? Yeah. Like if you're thinking about where them specifically, if you look at their pass catching group, it's like, all right, Michael Pittman's solid 1B. I get what Josh Downs was last year. I think he's going to be a really nice slot receiver for them. They've got a good offensive line. They got a really good running back. They got a quarterback we're excited about. How are you going to push this thing over the top? And that's the move that would. Giving up something to go get that third guy and saying, all right, we're cooking with gas now. If this guy clicks, what can we be? And them specifically, I think it becomes intriguing. And the Jags just having that sort of piece, with Lawrence and what they have already, I think that's the other team that, I would probably have circled there. But who ends up doing that if ends up happening, that'll be something that I'm watching, and we'll be watching it together.
Yeah.
All 3 of us in Detroit. Dane's already there. Dane's got Detroit staked out already. We will be arriving there today when you guys are listening to this on Wednesday. We'll be heading there, and we will be live on YouTube starting at 7:30 p.m. Eastern on Thursday. Me, Nate, Dane, drop-ins from Diana, some of our beat writers. We got some fun breakdowns of players. We've got some fun bells and whistles that are a little bit different from last year. Got a lot of things we are very excited about. So please make sure you are coming to check out the Athletic live draft show Thursday night, 7:30 p.m. Eastern, Athletic NFL YouTube page. And then we'll be back on Friday starting at, I think 6 p.m. Eastern. I don't want to get this wrong, but I think 6 p.m. Eastern on Friday, about an hour before the second and third round will kick off, because we got a lot of stuff that we got to worry about. We got a lot of stuff that we're going to have to recap. Speaking of recaps, little mechanics, some housekeeping. This will be live on YouTube, the live draft show. You can watch that there. You can watch it on a couple other platforms, but in the podcast feed, we will have podcasts from all 3 days of the draft. So you can watch the live draft show. And if you are a person who's only going to listen on audio, there will be a version and a product there for you as well. We encourage you to do both. We would love for you to come join us and still listen to the podcast in the way that you always do. So for now, that is all we got. This is our last one before we see you guys on Thursday night. We are very excited. Hope you guys are as well. We'll talk to you soon.